Forge the narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge Narrative. My name is Paul Murphy, your host. We are the Bella Lost Souls podcast. This is episode 202. I'm joined tonight by Horton Doughton.
I'm back.
And Chris Morgan.
Never cry, Space Wolf.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Horton, I'm glad you're back. I got a really kind of funny message not that long ago that says people haven't heard from you since 7th edition.
Well, it's been a long 8 weeks, but, here I am.
Well, it's a perfect time to bring you back on. We're going to talk about some Chaos Space Marines later on in the list, later on in the episode. First, we're going to talk about some Grey Knights. Though I feel like we gave the rundown of the Codex, but we didn't talk too much about maybe the tactics and list building. And it's been a while since we've talked about a real solid kind of just how we would build a list to play in a tournament.
Yeah, well, I love the Grey Knight Codex, and I'm happy to talk about it.
I want to give a quick shout to our tournament coming up, Warzone Atlanta. Tickets for that are going to go on sale for veterans at the end of the month, the 31st. Regular sale is going to happen on the 7th, I believe, of the next month. You guys are going to be getting emails about this. Check our Facebook page, Warzone Atlanta Facebook page, the Forge Narrative Facebook page. It is coming up soon. This is going to be an amazing event. We are partnered with a great local tournament and hobby and gaming group, the General Staff. Without this, it wouldn't be possible. They're providing amazing effort and support. Great group of guys.
Yeah, and I'm sure all your listeners know, Paul, but just to restate everyone, this is the best tournament there is. All the awesome things come together to make the best 40k weekend you can have. So get in line to get those tickets because it's well worth it.
Yeah, you will not, and they went fast. They went in a matter of hours last year. So if you have not come before or haven't come in the last year and want to come to this one, be ready to get that ticket. You will not be disappointed. I just mentioned the General Staff guys. We are working bust and hump on getting terrain ready because terrain is a different animal for Warhammer 40k 8th edition. It means a lot in some situations. Doesn't quite have the impact and maybe some of the ones that we want, but what it has done is it's changed what cover means and how one gets cover, and that plays a big part in everyone's experience at a tournament. And so we're taking great strides to get all the terrain ready for 8th edition, and I know everyone's working diligently behind the scenes, but like I said, tickets go on sale for that very soon. Be watching for coverage. It's the biggest party in 40k. It's a fun time, and is a great way to get together right before the holidays and play this game we love.
Dude, I'm so excited. I know that there's a lot of cool stuff coming, especially with our coverage of the event. GW, of course, put up an article about Warzone last year that was written by you, I think, Paul.
I did.
And it is the place you want to be. It is that kind of premier event.
Cannot wait. Andrew Whitaker just joined us.
What's up, guys?
Yo, man, I'm glad you came on. We're going to be talking some Grey Knight list here in a minute.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely want to talk about Warzone as our tickets will be going on sale very soon. I played a game. I mentioned demon summoning. We talked about demon summoning in the last episode. And I played a game, and I really enjoy it. I just want to say that I had a fun time kind of scheming about what demons I wanted to bring down during the game. And I had to think quick because I was playing again. It was chaos on chaos. I was playing Alpha Legion Noise Marines versus some pretty hard-hitting World Eaters. And they come at you very fast.
That's kind of what they do. That's what they're known for.
I can't get away from mentioning that I got absolutely steamrolled in the first game. But we went through the whole thing. That's just, it's a game of Warhammer. And I can't say anything about it. It was the guy I was playing made excellent decisions, got on me, and it was hard to dig out. I wasn't able to maximize what the Noise Marines were going to do, and I wasn't able to get my demons in place fast enough. I think that that summoning is powerful, and the second game I was able to dump down a Keeper of Secrets and a Nurgle Soul Grinder, and that was pretty good. I'll say that. That was fun to do.
Now, how are the Soul Grinders, do you think, doing in general? Just because I've fought a couple of them, and it didn't really feel like they hurt me that much.
Well, okay, if you're swinging chain axes, you probably don't want to fight a Soul Grinder. I guess it depends on what it is. I mean, if it was, what I liked about the idea, or what really worked the same as it has in previous editions, is I was able to look at what was going on in the battlefield and then react to it. Now, it wasn't free units. You still had to set aside the points, and you had to bring them in, and you had to actually, sacrifice move, make the roll, bring them in, have a spot to put them where they could be an impact of the game, because, they have to be within 12 inches. The unit has to be within 12 inches of the summoner, and they can't be within 9 inches of an enemy unit. So there has to be a spot to put them, but I liked that I could react to what was going on in a meaningful way.
Having that ability to ad hoc what you need for a particular problem definitely has power.
I do think the Soul Grinder is the real addition for them, and obviously I don't play Chaos, but I've played against them a number of times, is that they are incredibly durable, right? So while, I think to Chris's point, they're not a tremendous offensive output, they do survive. They're really, really tough to kill. And so I think from a Chaos list building standpoint, from a list design perspective, they serve a purpose, and they really do have a strong place in the kind of the current Chaos meta. That being, of course, like, hey, I need this thing to go and hold territory and not die.
With being able,
I think they hit that.
Yeah, taking an unmarked Chaos Lord. Remember, a Demon Prince, you have to pick a mark when you select them, but a Chaos Lord you can keep unmarked, and so that gave me a little bit of even more flexibility with what I was bringing down, because I wasn't taking one of the traditional cults. I wasn't taking Emperor's Children. I took Alpha Legion, but I also took Noise Marines. And let me say, the Noise Marines, with their ability to shoot after they die, is strong. I mean, even if you put them in, if you make a sacrifice play with them, you're still firing that awesome gun at least twice.
I'm a big fan of Noise Marines, especially from the Alpha Legion.
But we'll talk about Chaos later. I just wanted to describe my game, and then I was kind of put into practice what we were talking about on the last show. And if you take nothing away from it, it was fun to summon the demons, and I liked the ability to really change the way the game was going to go by having a decision to what demons to bring in. But summoning's not the big boogeyman anymore. It's not a bunch of free points. Now it is. It's fair. It seemed fair, but still cool.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, and apologies to all of the demon players who had unlimited trays of demons to summon in from the last edition. But hey, at least you've got variety.
You might still want to bring some of that. You're not going to need quite the number of lesser demons, but you could summon in a Demon Prince. You can summon it and whatever. We talked about it. You know what I'm saying. Let's talk about the complete opposite of that. Let's talk about Grey Knights.
Oh, yeah. Getting off the heresy train. You see that? The heresy train just had brakes.
We just pulled the brakes on the heresy train. Now, Andrew, I asked if you could help come up with a list for this week.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've texted back and forth a few times, and, it's interesting when we sit down to record, this particular group of guys, when the Forge the Narrative team kind of talks abstractly about lists, we are a diverse group, just diverse perspectives on both models, units. But anyway, so Paul and I were talking about how we list design for Grey Knights. And for me, I think two of the coolest developments one of the coolest developments is no doubt putting Grandmasters in Dread Knights. So strong, really, really, really powerful, and they're super useful. So
you can't ignore that. Can I jump in just 1 second? I think that when you're looking at a list, and if you want to stay true to like the core of whatever army you're building, if that's important to you, you have to look at what's distinctive about your army. We talk about this all the time. Like if you're building a Black Templar army, put in some Crusader squads. Yeah, that's it. And when you're looking at a codex, now what's going to be part of the Grey Knight distinctive landscape is that Chapter Master in a Dread Knight, or Grandmaster.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I really do think that the addition of this entity, right, is like, wow, this is a really great new option. It's basically, it's kind of like the Chapter Master on bike in 7th edition. If you're going to list design competitively, you're going to want to bring that tool.
That's interesting. Such a great tool. I've got some counterpoints, but I want to hear what you're saying.
I just mean to say that there are certain things that when you're going to list design for particular codices, there are certain no-brainers. And it occurs to me that in Grey Knights, Grandmaster in Dread Knight is a no-brainer. So anyway, so here's the list. And, it's an interesting mix of, I don't know if this is the apex of power or anything else like that, but
we got to start somewhere, right? I mean,
exactly.
You gotta put it out there.
It's kind of the building blocks. So I'm very impressed with paladins. I really, I know that's weird to say, but I really do think the paladins have their place in 8th edition. They're very, very hard to kill. 3 wounds apiece is really, really tough to kill, especially with a 2+ armor. And very often 2+ armor is that's its own invulnerable save, right? Because anything less than a las cannon, you still have a 4+ save against. Which, if you kind of think back comparatively to 7th edition, if you got hit with an AP2 weapon, then you were defaulting to that 5+. Whereas now, you're going to have a better save, I think, in a lot of cases. So anyway, so here's the list in kind of its basic iteration. It's 2 Grandmasters in Nemesis Dread Knights. I'm sorry, for starters, it's a battalion. So you got just a basic battalion. You've got 2 Grandmasters in Dread Knights and Grandmaster Valdis. That fills up your HQ options. I think Valdis is very, very powerful. 3 powers, 2 denials, very hard to kill, just really phenomenal.
He swings as hard as Drago.
He does. I think for his points, he's better than Drago.
He's 50 points less. That we were actually talking about him before the show. And for if you're designing an army that is scrounging for points, he's almost a bargain.
Which I think Grey Knights are almost always an army that's scrounging for points because of how expensive their models are per unit.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
100%.
So I think I hate to call Valdis the poor man's Drago because I think he offers options and utility that Drago can't touch. But he is just as effective in terms of offensive output and utility. So in any case, you've got 2 Grandmasters in Dread Knights and with Valdis. And the Dread Knight, so this is another breakdown, the stratagems for Grey Knights are fascinating. I encourage anyone, even if you don't play Grey Knights, if you're just an Imperium player, it's worth it to go out and buy that codex because their stratagems are awesome. They're fascinating, and I think there's a lot of tools to be built there. Horton and I were literally on a phone call earlier today, and we were talking about how the stratagems have really... I think that is where the complexity of 8th edition is going to be found because you can list design around particular stratagems. So...
yeah, they're not random. You just get to do them if you have the resources. If you've got the command points, you just get to do them.
Absolutely. And going into a game, you have those resources. I mean, you build a battalion and you're like, all right, I've got these 6 or 7 command points, whatever, depending on your list design. I can do these 2 or 3 things a few times per game, and that's going to allow me to make my list strategy work, which creates diversity in list design, which unfortunately right now I think in 8th edition there's a dearth of list diversity. But as more and more stratagems come out, as more and more codexes come out, you're going to see that diversity grow. And I only say that to say that there's 2 things I really am impressed with with the GK book. The stratagems, I think, produce a tremendous amount of utility, and I love their special weapons options. I think that the silencer, the Nemesis, or the Gatling silencer,
yep,
I think that's such a cool weapon.
That thing is money.
I think it's such money, and I think it's not only from a cool oh wow, this is an awesome unique Grey Knight weapon thing, but also from a competitive edge. That's 12 shots, right? And even though it's a heavy weapon and all that jibber jab, you're basically worst case scenario hitting on 4s. And for Dread Knights, that's a tremendous. I've got there's 24 shots doing D3 damage, and against the vast majority of units in the game that are T7 down. Worst case scenario, you're wounding on 5s, right? So if you're
that D3 damage adds up very fast. Very fast.
Even if you're shooting at Magnus, right? I mean, just the simple math on 12 shots against Magnus. Pardon me for the math hammer, but that's 8 hits. That's 3 wounds, right? On a 4+ down, you can do 4 wounds against Magnus on just what is essentially bolter fire strength weaponry, right? That's really, really valuable. So I think for this particular list, you've got Valdis and then 2
and that's not counting the Grandmaster rerolls.
Exactly. That's not counting hitting on 2s because Grandmasters, I believe, hit on 2s.
Yeah, hit on 2s.
For that ballistic skill. So phenomenal. I think that's hugely important, and that speaks nothing of their close combat prowess. So I definitely think that if you're list designing for Grey Knights, that's where you start, and that's kind of where you develop. The second thing is I'm a big fan of these strike squads. So this Paul and I were talking a few weeks ago, kind of off the cuff, and we were both commiserating a little bit about essentially single wound 3+ armor saves. Single wound Marines are, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, if I misquote you, or if you disagree with anything I'm about to say, please correct me. But right now, single wound models with a 3+ save, tough. They're not great, right? They're in a kind of an unhappy sweet spot where there's such a huge proliferation of negative AP modifiers that paying the points for that 3+ save, if you're paying 17, 18 points for a single wound 3+ save model, it's not competitively advantageous. That said, I love these strike squads. I think they are a fantastic troop choice.
This is what we were talking about a little bit. Paladins or strike squads. We completely overlook Terminators because of the value difference between a Terminator and even a Chaos Terminator type equivalent, the strike squad, and then consider the Paladin. So you're right in line with what we were chatting about right before we started this.
Yeah, that's actually funny because my list literally is strike squads. I've got 4 of them in this particular list because I do really think that because with a 5-man strike squad, you can give one of them a silencer, Gatling silencer. So and they teleport, right? They can deep strike, which storm bolters in this edition are very, very strong. They produce a tremendous amount of shooting at 12 inches or less. 5 guys in a strike squad is 20 bolter shots, right? So you trade out 4 of those bolter shots for a Gatling silencer, and in a 5-man squad, you have something like, whatever it is, 30 shots at strength 4. In 5-man squads for 107 points.
Well, I think the strike squads just get silencers, which is heavy 6.
That's right. They can't take the heavy. Correct. You're right.
6 shots still
6 shots
with that weapon, not an awful deal.
No, it's a big deal. It's good.
Especially because you can deep strike them and kind of precision where those shots end up. So you've got basically a single 5-man squad putting out 15 to 25 shots at 12 inches or less. A lot of shooting for 107 points. Again, harkening back to the conversation that Horton and I had earlier, where 8th edition seems to really put an emphasis on target priority confusion. There's a huge advantage for armies that say, what are you going to shoot at? And your opponent's like, I don't know what the most important thing for me to shoot at is. And I think one of the best parts of Grey Knights is that no matter what you put on the field, those strike squads are not going to be target number uno. Yes, they put out 20-something shots. Yes, they can do damage with those silencers, etc. But the Grey Knight, the Dread Knights, the Paladins, the Land Raiders, whatever you put in the Grey Knight army, that's going to be a higher target priority.
Did you say you had a Land Raider in your list?
I do not have a Land Raider in this
I'm just
list.
checking.
I do not. I'm maintaining my credibility as a quality list designer. But
there's a place for Land Raiders. The reason I actually brought that up because I think that you would be desperate for points, and the Land Raiders just not going to cut it.
I agree.
In a Grey Knight list.
I think Paul and you and I have had this conversation at least once before, where if you're going to bring a Land Raider, you might as well bring 3. Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
They're a phenomenal unit if you're going to duplicate them and force the issue for opponents. But but bringing a single Land Raider for S&Gs that's not a competitive army. Anyway, I want to wrap this up and get y'all's feedback on it as quickly as I can. So, in short, big fan of the strike squads. I think they produce a tremendous amount of output for their points and for the amount of attention your opponent's going to be giving them. But the rest of the list is essentially Paladin squads, and I am over the moon about 3-man Paladin squads. It's 165 points for 9 2+ wounds, and by that I mean 2+ armor save on 9 wounds.
Paladins, because you're adding them all together, because Paladins are 50-something points apiece, 55 points apiece with a Stormbolt.
Correct.
Okay.
So I believe that 3 of them, without any upgrades, with the Force Swords, is 165 points for a 3-man squad.
That's 55 each. That Yeah, that would
I
be
think that adds,
excellent.
and the Paragon is not a price upgrade. He's included in the price of the squad,
Yes.
right? And I think he is substantively better, right? He has
Extra attack,
Extra
more
attack.
Yeah. You've got the psychic powers, right? Depending on which ones you take with the Santic psychic powers. But overall, I really do believe that multiple paladin squads create issues. So in this particular instance, I've added four paladin squads, because in a battalion you can take 0 to 6 elite slots, and it leaves me with about 320 points left to play with, and I kind of leave that to the listener's imagination to do with as you please. For me, I would take a Vindicare assassin. I think that's a strong auto include for Grey Knights, and the reason being is that I think Grey Knights are particularly susceptible to the conscript commissar threat. They just don't have the volume to chew through those big screens. But if you have a Vindicare assassin or two, you can dome those commissars and then chew through those conscripts with regular shooting and the morale.
And assault and smites. And I want to talk about my only critique that I have is that I'm really in love with the smite manipulation from this book.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we should talk about. But so let me wrap up real quick. So essentially, at about 1,680 points, which gives any listener or any list designer a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of leeway.
A lot of leeway.
You can't summon demons with these guys.
Yeah, no,
Thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. You're looking at a couple of Dread Knights, a Super Psyker and Grandmaster Valdis, 4 objective secured units, and then 4 Paladin squads. And I think that is such a solid core of models and units for what you're trying to do in a competitive game, that those extra 300 points with which to build, or 200 to 400 points with which to build, you can really fill those soft spots. Is this an automatic, like, oh, I'm going to beat that guard list? No, probably not, right? I mean, there's still some problem matchups. But I think there's a lot to work with in the Grey Knight book.
So, Andrew, with that kind of put together, I have a couple of questions. The first one would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but Grandmasters don't have the same smite range buff effect that Brother Captains do. Is that right?
That's a great question. I'm not sure the answer to that.
They do not have the brother captain rule. That's what 8th edition has kind of done really well is that it's spread out the buffs between different leader types.
So yeah, like role specific buffs. Like if you want this particular thing, you're going to need one character versus another, unless you can field Gilliman, in which case he just gives everybody everything.
He does, but the brother captain has that is his own specific role. You're talking about, I believe, the psychic locus.
Right. So my question then is, do you feel like this list would benefit from the addition of a brother captain, or would you consider substituting a brother captain in the place of another one of those HQs to get that smite range manipulation?
What the Psychic Locus does, just to make sure everyone knows, is when the friendly Grey Knights unit within 6 inches of the brother captain manifests the smite power, you double its range. So where the Grey Knights have their rights of banishment, it lowers the smite range to 12 inches. This would buff it to 24. And it also reduces the amount of wounds it does, but you're still doubling the range of smite powers with a brother captain.
So I think that is a incisive question, Chris. I think that the answer is, in my opinion at least, is no, and here's why. I think that what you're talking about and what the brother captain does with that additional range advantage is kind of a separate list archetype, and it's not less valuable. It's just you're doing things differently. I think with the list I designed was very much I want to deep strike as much as possible. I want to, and then you've got, of course, with the psychic power that you can, essentially deep strike once you're on the table. The portal psychic power.
Gate of Infinity.
Gate of Infinity.
Is that the one?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. With Gate and then with deep striking, you're closing that range. The intent of this list design type is to close that range, to take the midboard, kind of a la 5th edition Grey Knights, where you take the midboard and then just have a tremendous amount of small arms fire. I mean, I think this list puts out something like 190 strength 4 shots a turn with all the storm bolters if they're in double tap range. That's a tremendous amount of output at that mid-board kind of mid-range shooting. I think those brother captains really enhance a Grey Knight's army that is not intentionally closing that gap. You don't need to go from 12 to 24-inch range if your intent is to land 9 inches away from someone. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I feel like that's a pretty fair point, but I know that with especially in the pre-show we were talking about how good that is with the brother captain, and in those instances where maybe you don't want to get up close and personal, having that flexibility would be good. Especially where the strike squads, they're essentially walking after they arrive. So, the first thing that I thought of after listening to your list, what to do with the rest of those points, I thought about having some Razorbacks or something, because Razorbacks are really good right now.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I do think that that's kind of one of the advantages of list designing with like, all right, here's my core, and now I've got 200 to 500 points of flexibility, because that really, you can really fill a lot of gaps. For me, I think the frustration that I have with Razorbacks is that if I put one on the field and it's not painted blue and it's not 6 inches away from a rowboat, I'm just handcuffing myself.
I feel like you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, you feel like you're doing something wrong. To your point, Chris, yes, Razorbacks are great right now. I think that if that's where you're leaning towards in a competitive sense, there are better ways to do it than Grey Knights. And so I was kind of hoping to optimize what the Grey Knights have.
With that amount of points, you're looking at doing things like adding assassins. Adding assassins is pretty neat. You have to fit them within some type of force org, but you could get a Sheep Sister, a battle. Like, I know there's going to be a big focus on OBSEC and taking the similar faction type within a detachment to spread around that objective security and stuff like that coming up. But if you have a throwaway detachment anyway, who cares if you're mixing in the Imperial soup and giving up maybe some of that bonus because you don't have troops in that detachment anyway?
Yeah.
If I could jump in here real quick, one thing I wanted to say about this list is I really like the core, and I like the idea of the midboard mass Stormbolters. I think you will obliterate all of the demon armies ever, because they're not going to shoot you, and you're going to shoot them, and then you're going to smite them, and it's very bad for them. But hearkening to your point that you made at the beginning about how much you like the Grey Knight stratagems, and also how much I like the Grey Knight psychic powers, I think this list might benefit by using some of those extra points to buff up one of those squads of paladins to a much larger number, so you can fully maximize your stratagems and psychic powers for some killer combos.
The psychic onslaught may be one of the ones you're talking about that increases the strength and AP of silencers, heavy psy cannons, and psy cannons.
Oh man. Yeah, that is so good with the silencers. I mean, at that point, right, the increasing the strength in AP, all of a sudden, all of your toughness 8, low armor save, and by low I mean 2+, 3+ armor save models are suddenly sweating a little bit.
And there's a Cybolt ammunition one also that does increase the strength and AP of bolters and heavy bolters and storm bolters and hurricane bolters.
Along with that same concept of getting a strength buff, that's why I personally really like the Nemesis Force Halberd, because you go up to that magical strength 5, and then you could hammer hand to get +1 to wound. So even something that is toughness 8, you could wound it on 4s. Mm-hmm. So all three of those things give you a way to be significantly better at hurting the stuff that just Stormbolters alone are not that good at hurting.
And what you were saying a second ago, you want to pop this stratagem when you have a lot of bodies on the table.
Yes.
When you can maximize that the most.
Yeah, when you've got a big unit that hasn't taken casualties yet, you want to pop this stratagem and just unleash this hail of better shots on an enemy, because it could matter.
Well, for sure. I think GW with these stratagems has made incentives for us to have big units, because, applying any one of those stratagems to a 3-man paladin unit or a 5-man strike squad, you're like, oh, this makes them better, but it's even more better if they're even bigger.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging us. Yes.
I like that. And I guess it could technically work for your Chapter Master too. I mean, coming in at I keep saying Chapter Master, but Grandmaster as well. I mean, for me, I do like the Brother Captain. I'd almost want to see one of those Grandmasters go down to a regular Dread Knight and scoop some of those points back up and include the Brother Captain, because I think with some of the missions you're going to see, you're going to want to have to hang out in a certain position on the table to score points, like for a progressive objective or or a search and destroy type mission element where you have to get over there, sit on a turn, and remove an objective or something, if that's one of the mission parameters, and you might like that little bit of extra killing power.
I certainly don't disagree with that. I mean, I think that the Brother Captain certainly has his place. I'm kind of a more aggressive list designer. I want to get after stuff just from a style of play perspective. But if for players who prefer a more holistic, well-rounded
take a look at
list
the missions
design
in your area. I mean, that's one of the things.
Exactly.
If you're playing for an event, you take a look at the missions, and you play to win. We always suggest play towards whatever the missions that you're going to be fighting. So if none of those things I just described are one of the paths to victory, then forget that advice.
Yes, the missions are absolutely important to keep in mind. Your local meta is also hugely important to keep in mind. And by that I mean, I don't mean to say, well, I know X, Y, and Z local players are going to show up and they'll be playing this, so I'm going to bring my, F version of my list to beat those players. That's not what I'm saying. But there's certainly something to be said. We know that certain players are going to be bringing certain types of lists. You have to account for those types of things. Only you, our listeners, will know kind of what the best thing to bring is. But I think Paul's point was about bringing assassins to fill in those gaps is really, really quality advice. Because for Grey Knights,
assassin is what 80 points. He's dirt cheap. He might even be 70 something. He's incredibly inexpensive.
I think that Eversors and Vindicares are so useful, so strong, so useful, especially for Grey Knights players. I mean, because Grey Knights are so expensive and they do leave big gaps in the list design.
You just have less bodies to put on the table, and that could equate to not having as many units to grab for objectives, not being able to engage as many units. But these assassins can engage. They force your opponent to make decisions, and they could be potentially disastrous in even the deployment phase.
Oh, huge point. And the Eversors especially should and are capable of absorbing tremendous amounts of attention. They take a lot to kill. They get to engage a lot of things. And then with 8th edition, the assault phase in 8th edition is basically, it's the wild, wild west. I mean, I don't have to base anybody. The big swings with single model units swinging around and engaging multiple opposing units. I mean, we could spend a whole episode talking about the ways that you can engage multiple units with your own assaulting unit.
That will get you. I mean, it can wreck you if you're not prepared, or you have one guy a half inch out of place.
It will win and lose games. I mean, I know as a guard player, you have to be keenly aware of what's coming in to attack your units and how they can pile in, swing around, and engage multiple units. It's very, very powerful.
Before we take a break, I want to mention Hammerhand. Hammerhand, it's not a buff to strength anymore. Well, it's not a straight buff to strength anymore. Now what Hammerhand does, you pick a friendly Grey Knight unit within 12 inches of the Psyker, so 12 inches of Voldus in this example. Add 1 to any wound rolls made for that unit's melee weapons until the start of your next turn. You're adding a whole pip to the wound roll.
I mean, that's the power that gets me so fired up about the 10-man unit of whatever, but especially Paladins, because if you apply that power and then attack with 10 Paladins, I mean, you're going to kill everything, and you could potentially activate again and kill something else. So that power is so crazy, and and since you can only cast one power one time, to me that power screams, please take a 10-man unit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that stood out for me as well, just coming from a 30k perspective where the Blood Angel Legion tactics, every Blood Angel has that rule standard where your wound roll is 1 better than it would be normally. Like, that is so lethal.
Agreed. This has been a good rundown of a potential list, and I like that you built in some flexibility for that. So even if people took it as a template, they still can make it their own, something unique to them, or to counter or meta counter to something going on in their environment. Hold tight, guys. We're going to come back. We're going to take a quick break. Come back, and when we come back, I'm actually going to be talking with Benson Green from Mindworm Games, and we have an ongoing segment where we're talking about game design and being a game producer out there and making your own independent game. And Benson has some amazing insight for that. So we're going to come back, talk to Benson, then when we get back, we're going to talk about some Chaos Space Marines and the finishing move segment.
Sounds good.
You're listening to Forge the Narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to a special segment of Forge the Narrative. I'm still Paul. I got Benson Green from Mindworm Games.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be back again. I love this podcast.
Well, Benson, you've been a part of a series for us of like how to produce a game, how to get a game from an idea in your mind to something on the shelf that people can buy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to talk to you about this today. So thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to talk about this, and I love talking about this because I want to see more people take their ideas and make them into a reality. To put more games out there. I mean, there's a lot of discussion in the market today. I kind of liken it to what I'm hearing in the market today to what we hear about in New Orleans. That's where I'm from, and in the restaurant industry. And some people today in New Orleans are saying that the number of new restaurants that are being released or created, I guess whatever you call it, is getting to a point where there's so many it's becoming problematic for all the other restaurants. And I hear people today, other people who make games, saying, oh man, there's so many games out there, it's kind of bad for the industry. My view is absolutely not, because we're not talking about restaurants, we're talking about a niche market within a niche within a niche. So the more people are doing, the more stuff that's out there, and the better that stuff is, the better it is for everybody.
Before we get too deep, I want to send people to your website, mindwormgames.com, is where you can find your game, The Exiles, and more about Mindworm Games and how you do some of the things that you do. You've got content info on there. Lots of pictures, lots of stuff where people can find what you do. And I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I want to direct people there because, I kind of preach this, but support the people that support what you like. And Mindworm Games supports FTN. And we're happy to bring your message out to people. And about this topic, you're living it. And so, I want to talk more. I want to talk about the actual topic, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you actually produce a game and you are doing what we are talking about. And people should check it out at mindwormgames.com.
Well, I appreciate the plug there. Thank you. Usually I forget to do that.
But yeah, so saturation of games, I guess, is something that could happen, but
we're not saturated. We're not saturated.
Well,
That's ridiculous.
We're not. I mean, people that get the playlist kind of games like the games, and the people that the people that like to get the big box games, the big box board games, like to get those games. And so, if you've got a good game and you've got a good idea, then make it, and you'll find your audience.
Yeah, and part of the great thing about making a game is that with a show like this or segments like this is that you can listen to the mistakes that other people have made and try to avoid them.
Well, that's what this one is going to be about. In the previous segments, we've talked about the journey and how to make certain decisions, like how to pick an artist, when to start prototyping to some degree, how to set up your shop kind of thing. We talked about some of the very fundamentals, but on here, we're going to talk about like knowing what knowing everything you've done so far, how would you do it all over again? Yeah.
And that question is really easy to answer. The thing I would definitely do over again is the way I've done the miniatures, the way we did the miniatures. And that's an easy decision to make. It's an easy call to make because, I like the models we have, but I think we could have done things a lot differently. I think we could have done a lot of things better. And on top of that, on top of knowing that we could have done things better, it's also where almost all the money has gone, because that's where the bulk of your money's going.
Well, it's a physical thing. You have to make it. You've got to get it. You've got to get it sculpted. You've got to get the concept art done. You've then got to find a way to make a mold and then make something that fills that mold. Or
to put some perspective on it, all of the equipment in my workshop, 2 spin casters, 2 vulcanizers, a CNC mill, belt sander, all the pegboard and stuff on the wall, the workbenches we built, all that stuff, less than the first 20 miniatures we had made to set up my entire workshop.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's another thing you got to think about when you're starting a company like especially like the way we did it is what you're putting your money into. And miniatures are risky because you're putting a lot of your capital into something that you kind of hope sells, right? But I think so when I talk having some regrets about the way we did our miniatures, the fundamental I think problem that I didn't know I was creating for Mindworm Games when I started Mindworm Games, I really wanted to do awesome miniatures. I was really focused on this idea of, because I love miniatures, and I wanted to make I wanted to kind of push boundaries and play with the way we're doing scale a little bit and make some really really creative miniatures. But on the other hand, I knew what kind of product we were creating, and I knew who we were selling to. I knew what kind of market we were going to be targeting. And so we had to, I didn't say have. We made all these choices with the way we were making our miniatures that was directed to those sort of aspects. And trying to kind of push the boundaries of the way miniatures are done and work within the budget we had and work within the means that we had, and also try to satisfy the market that we were trying to enter into. Those two things didn't really work together, and I ended up, trying to have my cake and eat it too. And so we ended up with miniatures that I think are fine the way they are, but they would be leaps and bounds better, at least for Mindworm Games, for the Exiles product. There would be leaps and bounds better for that if we had made different design choices when we were approaching those assets.
What do you mean by different? Because I mean, they could be a whole different. I mean, there's a whole different things you could say. But what do you mean by different choices?
Sure. All right, so if you look at our miniatures at Mindworm Games, there's a couple of things that leap out. They're made in metal. We would always have gone with that decision. They are single-piece miniatures, so we don't part them out at all. So there's no separate arms or hands or anything like that. And they have integral circular bases. So all those things are design choices, important design choices for us. And that dictates a lot of how the miniature is going to look. So to get something to cast in a single piece, you have to work within a very limited space in terms of how you can pose the miniature. They also have to be game pieces, right? So you have to consider how they're going to be used, right? So, for example, I love Black Scorpion miniatures. They make some really fantastic models, but I don't play with my Black Scorpion cowboys very much because they're made of a resin that's a little brittle, and so gun barrels tend to break, right? And so when you're playing a game and you've had a few beers and you're bumping miniatures around the table and you knock something around, or you're transporting it to the game store every day, those kinds of miniatures are a little too fragile for that, right? And so there's all kinds of these practical considerations that go into it. I wouldn't change any of those, but some of the design choices that I wanted to make in terms of having this idea of having these progressive miniatures that cut against these other important design choices. So like the size of our gun barrels, right? That's one thing that was important. Like the way the proportions of the miniatures, and that's something that we kind of directed with the artist we were working with, Marco Sano. He did a fantastic job with the kind of difficult stuff that we asked him to do. So what we ended up with were miniatures that have proportions that are a little small. So they look good, but they're a little small. So for gaming purposes, they're not too fragile, but they can be a little fragile in parts. And then the biggest thing about it is that the details are a little too fine for what we're trying to do, right? Because what we're targeting in Mindworm Games, like with the Exiles product, I always knew that we weren't selling a line of miniatures that also has a game associated with it, and the game is sort of helping us sell miniatures. We weren't selling a war game where you buy a whole bunch of miniatures for it and you're trying to play the war game, and that you eventually want to expand your game, and so you're done playing Space Marines, so now you're going to play some Tyranids, or I want to start a new Tau collection, right? That's sort of what Warhammer does. They're selling this war game experience. With Exiles, we're essentially selling a story. So if you look at our product line, we have right now, I think, 20 some odd unique sculpts that we sell. But we also have 5 different campaigns now with, I forget exactly the count of it, but it's if you put it all together, it's like easily 70 or 80 hours of narrative gameplay. We have like 30,000 words of fluff. We're selling stories. And when you buy an Exiles...
Well, can I take a minute to explain
sure.
that? When you say you're selling stories, you actually sell campaign packs that come with miniatures that have character, like backgrounds and story associated with the miniatures that people play.
Yeah, and we're selling narrative campaigns that you play with those miniatures. So it's sort of like a mix of a role-playing game and a miniature war game. And so when you buy a character pack for Exiles, you're buying like the way I like to say it is that when people buy an Exiles character, they're buying the idea of how that character is going to grow and change. Whereas in a war game, often when you're buying a unit, to add to your army, you're buying maybe the story of what your army was up to the point where it is now. Like I have, this is my Imperial Guard army. This is their regiment. This is the regimental history. And now these guys are going to go fight other guys, and they're going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And maybe I'll develop a little story beyond that. But mostly what I'm investing in terms of narrative is what has happened all before, right? And I create things to kind of evoke that. Whereas in a narrative focused game like Exiles, it's more like a role playing game where you expect your character is going to grow and change. So if you look at a game like Frostgrave or Mordheim, you're building a war band that you expect is going to change. Same thing with Blood Bowl. You're building a team and you expect that team is going to change, and so you have an idea of what's going to happen in the future. Exiles goes way farther than that. Whereas when you buy your character, you're expecting that character is going to have a whole life and it's going to die eventually, and you're going to create a new character. And so we're very much selling story. And because we're selling story, we put a lot of effort into that narrative. We put a lot of effort. Like I said, we have 30,000 words of fluff at this point, which I think is crazy when I start counting it all up.
And you built this, just so I can catch people up, is you came at this with a concept. Like you have, when I'm talking about these campaign packs, you have dime novels made expressly like the original dime novels from the Old West. And with a tongue in cheek, with a little bit of Weird West type thrown in there, so it's a complete concept game.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when you buy an Exiles campaign, you get some miniatures to be the bad guys, but then we have these stories that you play through, and then like I said, we have 5 of those campaigns, and we're going to keep making those campaigns and making them. And story pulls through all of this stuff. The story pulls through the way we design our characters. Story pulls through every single one of our item cards. Has jokes and references worked into it, and so we put a lot of effort into that. And the effort that we put into that, because there's only so many hours in the day, that effort is not getting put into the way we develop the miniatures, right? And that also means we're targeting a certain kind of market. So a lot of and I knew this going in, right? So when I created Mindworm Games, I knew that when we were selling Exiles, a lot of our initial customers were probably going to come directly from role-playing gamers. And we have a lot of role-playing gamers who buy our products. But that means we're also targeting a group of customers that are not as experienced with miniatures as a hardcore wargamer who's been putting together infinity models and
they don't have a bunch of paints. They haven't been practicing to paint for 20 years.
They don't know how to wet blend.
I mean, I'm just setting it up for kind of where you're going, I think, with what you would do a little bit, make it a little bit easier, removing the barrier of entry to get into that hobby side of it and not just the role play side of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we're talking about this before we started recording, but one of the big moments for me and kind of coming to grips with this disparity and what I kind of wanted and what we were doing was when I was talking to Josh Qualtieri from Zombie Smith, and he was doing some emergency reprints of our miniatures with his 3D printer. And one of the things we were kind of chatting about when we were talking about my miniatures is that they're not easy to paint. And it just hit me. I was like, Josh is right. These miniatures aren't easy to paint. They've got fiddly little details. Like, if you were new to painting miniatures, some of our miniatures, you'd be like, oh, screw this. Like El Pato, one of our guys, has like a feather cloak. Good God, right? It's got like 50 little feathers on it. That's crazy. If you're new to painting. Whereas if you look at like Reaper Bones miniatures, a lot of those miniatures are simple sculpts with chunky details that look great with a base coat and highlight and a wash, right? You can paint them with simple techniques. They look great with those simple techniques. You can do a higher quality if you want to, but if you look at miniatures, say from Arena Rex, and they have beautiful miniatures. I own a lot of their miniatures. They're absolutely fantastic, and they look gorgeous when they have a great paint job on them. But that's some pretty high quality artwork, and so you throw a shoddy paint job on an Arena Rex miniature, and it sort of hurts you a little bit inside. And you're like, oh my goodness, what did I do to that thing? What did I do to this beautiful thing? I did this basic paint job on there.
Well, if I can jump in here for a second again too, there are some companies out there that when you are a master painter, their miniatures look amazing, and you kind of buy into that before you get that miniature home and realize that you can't make that happen. because of the way the miniature is. It has less to do, well, I shouldn't say the way the miniature is, because obviously it's attainable with a lot of skill and a lot of effort.
Yeah, but that's what they're. It depends on what kind of market you're targeting it, right? And so the Arena Rex guys, they're targeting a market. They're targeting I don't know their business, right?
Example, I think that their models are beautiful and they lend themselves to great paint jobs.
Right. But the point I was trying to make about that is, I think, again, I don't want to speak for the guys at Arena Rex, who are fantastic, and I love the company, and they have a very, very fun game, and they're going to be doing some excellent stuff at Gen Con next week, which you should definitely check out. But like I said, I don't want to speak for them, but kind of looking at the way they do their business, the way they run their company, what I see is a bunch of guys who are very miniatures forward. Like you could happily buy the Arena Rex miniatures just to paint them and put them on a display shelf or in a diorama. They're gorgeous models, and you can do a lot with them. And you pay a premium price because they've had to spend a lot of money developing that. A lot of money in the concept art, a lot of money to the sculptors, really expensive sculptors, a lot of money refining those designs and making sure the manufacturing is top quality. Because to get those fine details, you have to really be confident in your manufacturing. That's another thing that we had a problem with our miniatures, right? Because when I created My More Games, I didn't know how to spin cast. It started with some money I had and an idea. What I should have done when I went to set out to make our first round of miniatures, to take more money that I was investing in my workshop and put it into miniatures, that money we were never going to get back, right? Unless we sell these miniatures. What I should have done is focused more on models or sculpts that were going to be easy for me to manufacture, because I was going to be learning the trade. So I should have been focused on what is manageable for me to do well, and what is going to be easy for my customers to work with, right? And focused on those design goals and kept everything tight to making everything targeted to what I was trying to do and what I was trying to sell. But instead, I was trying to do two things. I was trying to make Arena Rex miniatures when we didn't have the budget for that anyway, right? And I didn't have the manufacturing know-how to do that properly, to make those kinds of beautiful miniatures happen. And I wasn't selling to people who were going to be wanting to buy a miniature and put it on and paint it and put it on a shelf. I was going to be selling to people, and I do sell to people who want to take that miniature out and play with it. So as an example, when I was having discussions with other people in the industry about the way we're doing our bases, I used to get into a lot of arguments about that, because people were saying, why would you do that? Why would you do those bases? And I said one of the reasons why I do those bases is because I want you, if you buy our products, I want you to open the Persona pack, take out the miniature, and be able to stand it on the table and look at it standing up, all fully posed, whatever, not in a bunch of pieces in a baggie. I want to be standing up on the table, staring at you while you're looking through 36 item cards and laughing at all the fun jokes and looking at all the cool artwork and looking and reading about all the cool skills the character can learn in the future. That's what I want. I want that miniature.
I'm nodding over here. I can get behind that. I
want that miniature saying, "Play with me now. Play this game now. Find some friends, throw some paint on me, and play this game." Right? That's what I wanted, to do for that kind of experience. It would have been better if everything about the way we were designing those miniatures was feeding into that experience. So,
that's what I was just going to say. Is I believe that when you are playing a miniature game, you are, whether you know it or not, you are selling that experience of someone interacting at a very physical level with your product.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you're also selling, when you're selling an experience, in my opinion, as a great consumer of games and miniatures, when you're selling that experience, a big part of that experience is imagining what you're going to do. Because in reality, 75%, I think, I would hazard a guess to say 75% of miniatures people buy end up in a drawer and are never played with. And that's my collection. I've got 75% of my stuff is
you have
in
a
boxes.
real world example of a of yourself and
Yeah.
me. I mean, I've got I have more than I will ever play with on any Saturday.
Exactly.
Just
right.
because I enjoy the collection and the fantasy about it.
And the fantasy, right? So I've got whole armies of Warhammer stuff in boxes because I was, I had an enjoyable time imagining, oh, what's this army going to be? And oh, I need to buy these things. And how am I going to build this army? Like what am I going to spend my points on? What units do I need? Oh, I'm going to convert some stuff. So I'll convert these guys here. Oh, I need all these bits here. I need 20 more las guns.
And you thought that when you were getting going that you had that encapsulated into something that people could easily digest. And now I think what you're telling me is that there's still some things you could have changed that would have got you to grasp that a little bit easier, a little bit quicker.
Yeah. So like in the first instance, we could have designed our miniatures to be easier to manufacture, and we would have had to sacrifice some things that I wanted to keep, like this idea that I wanted, like the market is moving in a direction of finer proportions and a little bit more true to scale than this more chunky heroic scale. The market's moving in that direction. I want to be on the forefront of that. No, because I'm not going to be able to manufacture that as easily, right? I'm not, like if I have gun barrels that are like a millimeter in diameter, that's manufacturable, and that's about big enough to play with without getting broken. But man, that is not easy, right? That's not easy to produce, right? So there's that level on it, and then there's a level of how easy is it, how approachable are all these minis for people who don't have no experience, because that's who we're selling to. And I think we could have done a better job on both fronts if I had said, you know what, I am comfortable knowing that my models are not going to be as good as models from that company or that company or that company, that company, that company. We are not making the best miniatures. We're going to get our miniatures are going to get killed killed from an aesthetic perspective, from an artistic perspective, are going to get killed by 60% of the companies out there selling miniatures, and be okay with that, right? Mm-hmm. I should have been able to say that and been confident in what we were doing. Because for example, if you look at Frostgrave, a lot of really fun game, a lot of really fun models associated with that game. But from an objective perspective, the Frostgrave models are not the same models you get from a company like Twisted, for a game like Twisted, by Demented Games, or a game like Arena Rex, or a game even Infinity, right? Infinity miniatures, from an objective perspective, are just better. It's just higher quality artwork, right? It's the finer details, more. The poses are a lot more expressive. And they have to do things to make that possible. They have to have all these different parts and complicated casts and whatnot. And again, that also makes them more expensive to produce. And so, the average Frostgrave miniature is not $10. That's what you go to buy an Infinity miniature. You're going to be shelling out $10 at least, right? But that's okay, because Frostgrave is really, really fun, and they have fun, expressive miniatures, and those miniatures are really easy to paint. And recently, I ran through one of our Exiles campaigns that I hadn't actually made a proper set of miniatures for, and we only sell one. We sell the boss, and you can proxy some of our other miniatures for the other different new bad guys we created for this campaign. Because again, we're mainly selling story and less more story forward than miniatures, and so we sell some products that don't even have any miniatures in them, and just new bad guys. And I assembled a collection of all these different miniatures to represent these bad guys. And I was painting, so I had a bunch of Wild West miniatures from like 4 different companies on my paint table, and I painted through all of them. And I'm like, you know what? Knuckle Duster miniatures, I think they make the best Wild West miniatures on the market today, but they are not as easy to paint as miniatures from Westwind or Artisan Designs. Those miniatures are a lot easier to paint, because the details they do the details a different way, right? They take the washes a lot easier. Like the facial details on Knuckle Duster miniatures are a little bit more shallow than you get on, so like, say for example, an Osprey type product or an Exiles product, right? Exiles products our miniatures have pretty shallow facial details, because again, we were focused more on a true to scale type of proportion, but that makes it a little bit more difficult to paint, because you got to use a finer, you have to have finer brush control to bring out the details.
So if I can kind of drill this down a little bit, I know we're talking about several different things, a combination between manufacturing capabilities, realistic goal setting, and also that fantasy of the person that's going to be actually consuming the product and playing the game. And I think that what you're suggesting is slanting more towards that attainable fantasy to engage your users more.
What I'm saying is you should be comfortable knowing what you want to do, right? You should have, you pick a plan and be comfortable knowing that you're going to have to make sacrifices in order to achieve that and to realize that goal, right? So if you want to make beautiful miniatures and sell these beautiful miniatures, you can do something like a company like Mindwork. It's a lot like Mindworm. These are really funny guys. We launched our companies at about the same time. We had no idea that our names are so similar. But these guys at Mindwork, they just sell miniatures right now. They don't have a game that they do. They just produce these beautiful miniatures one at a time, and they sell them. Same thing like Kingdom Death did. They just made miniatures for a very long time, put a lot of effort into making these really high quality miniatures, and they didn't put any, they didn't have a game associated with it or a lot of narrative associated with it. So what I'm saying is you should be happy knowing that you have a goal you want to achieve and doing what you need to achieve that goal. And so for us at Mindworm Games, the reason why I would say we would do our miniatures differently today is because we had design goals that didn't jive with our goals, our ultimate goals for the product, and that caused some problems with the most expensive thing we were creating. Sure, miniatures, and those miniatures are going to be, I mean, we could redo them, but that's not going to happen for a while because they have to get to a point where we have a whole bunch of extra cash that's not going into new products that we can go back and retool earlier products and re-release those.
Well, I'm glad we had this talk again. It's for people that have the idea of entering into this market. This is the type of wisdom that is not necessarily easy to come by. Or cheap to come by.
Not cheap, not cheap to come by. You have to make these mistakes, and it's easier to it's good to hear somebody else make these mistakes and talk candidly about it. And I don't have a problem saying that I wish we had done something different with our miniatures. I'm happy with the way I think we could have done something different with our miniatures, but I don't think they're crappy. I don't think
don't sell it short. I mean, you really are selling the experience. This is it's a miniature combat game, but it's story driven, it's narrative driven, and you play through scenarios, even through campaign type style games, and that's what it lends it to. It lends itself to that. It's very much, in my opinion, at the skirmish level, but there's more things than just destroying your opponent. That's not even really part of the deal.
It's co-op.
Yeah,
it's cooperative. You're destroying the bad guys.
That's what I mean. I mean, it's a whole different experience. So don't sell it short, and I mean that sincerely. Not even for the purposes of just upping it on the show, but it's a different thing altogether. And what you're discussing is maybe you would have done this differently.
I would have not been trying to beat miniatures, right? I would not have been saying I would not have had an unrealistic goal. I would not have said, I want to hire, a guy who's a sculptor who's rightfully charging $1,500 a miniature, right? I want my miniatures to be as good as that when I've got a budget of $400. Like, that's not going to happen. Right. But that was the headspace I was in. I was like, I wanted to do miniatures like that, but and it was not jiving with the realities. And I think it's more important to get your product on the market and be comfortable with the way it's going to be at a level that you can manage. And if you want to have a beautiful miniature,
I mean, that's kind of where I was going. Is like you play to the strengths of. I mean, recognize what your weaknesses are, be comfortable with them, but maximize what you are good at. And,
and if you want beautiful miniatures and you don't have the kind of, like, we were doing 20 miniatures, right? That's why we needed to have the kind of budget we had for the individual miniatures. But if you're doing 5, you can hire somebody who's going to charge $2,000 and make a beautiful miniature. You can invest that money and then recoup it in other ways. Sell it at a higher price point. Right.
Benson, man, thanks very much for taking the time. I know you're going to be running an off-site event near Gen Con.
Outlaw Gen Con. Yeah, Outlaw Gen Con. We had to cancel our booth at Gen Con for a variety of both personal and professional reasons, not the least of which is that my day job, a client in my day job, pushed a project right over Gen Con.
Don't they know the geek schedule? Come on.
It's been it's my vacation. It's my work vacation, and it would have been sacrosanct except for the fact that one of my coworkers chipped his spine, and he's like out of pocket. So he's injured, and so now we can't lose 2 people on the project. So now I had to go. But yeah, we have it. It's at the St. Joseph Brewery on August 18th, 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. or whenever we finish. It's a free event, so come on down. The only thing you have to do is buy your own beer.
But people can find you on Facebook. You actually do a sit and chat in your workshop on most Sundays.
Yeah, not this past Sunday because I was driving up to Indianapolis.
Most. I covered it with most. And then they can find everything that we've talked about, at least from your part of the game and your perspective on it, at mindwormgames.com.
Yeah, our Facebook page is where a lot of the action is right now because we've been very busy. After post Gen Con, a lot more stuff will be popping up on the website and our blog.
Well, Benson, safe travels and have a good night.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
FTN is brought to you by Bell of Lost Souls. Check out www.bols.org for the best daily hobby articles on the web.
Hey everybody, we are back. I'm still Paul. I got Chris Morgan and Andrew Whitaker.
Hey guys, welcome back.
What's up, homies?
And Horton Dowden.
I'm still here.
All right, we're going to talk about Chaos Space Marines, but I want to have a bone to pick. I shouldn't say a bone to pick. I have something I'd like to just put out there into the world to exist. Models, all right, Harlequins specifically. You guys know I'm a big Harlequins fan. I have finally convinced myself I'm going to do my best. I'm going to put all my painting techniques into like trying to make a really good Harlequin, using some of the finishing move stuff we've talked about, a bunch of tutorials out there online. But then I started like putting together these models and they don't hide very well. These are units that you don't want shot and they're all jumping through the air above terrain, standing on rocks and stuff. It's a difficult thing to do.
It's just there's some just kits that do not lend themselves well to how they should play in the 40k world. I mean, you really think about Harlequins, they should absolutely be hiding, skulking, and then springing into action when it's ready. But
I don't know.
Right. They play 6 inches tall. It's terrible.
I don't imagine a Harlequin that isn't just leaping around for no reason. In fact, even when they're just like reading a book or something, I'm pretty sure that they're doing some kind of somersault or jumping
awesome
in place.
I want to use them. It was my first army ever was Harlequins, as some of you know. I want to get them back on the table. I feel like I'm at a point, like painting-wise, where I can start to just kind of begin to do them justice. So I want them to be good. So selfishly, I'm like asking whenever they get some cool rules, there needs to be something in there that accounts for how awesome their models look, i.e. tall and i.e. don't fit in terrain well.
Well, you know, back in the day, it was abstracting. You abstracted all the models, right? This blocked line of sight to this.
Yeah, you have level 1, level 2, level 3.
Level 1, level 2. I mean, that solves the issue. We'll see if they go back to that, but it seems unlikely at this point.
I think that's unlikely. I think they just need some kind of old school type, I should say old school, 5th edition type rule where they've got that 24 inches can't shoot. And I don't know if that's overbalanced. I'm just saying that I don't think we want players out there having to make modeling choices to figure out if the faction they want to play is playable.
And on that same note, I mean, we also don't want the game to turn into token 40k where, you know, a quarter is a Space Marine and whatever, just like, you know, using felt as terrain. And I'm talking to you, War Machine Hordes, where you don't even really need the models to play the game. So that's the trouble with having, you know, art as a part of our hobby, right? Aesthetics mattering is that there's also functional considerations that come into play with that.
That's my one beef I wanted to voice for the shows. But let's talk about Chaos Space Marines. I know I talked about summoning, and I won't do that. We actually have a really cool World Eaters list to go over. I mean, World Eaters they're just good. They just really are good. They do everything you've ever thought about a World Eater was ever going to do, and they do it well.
They do. There are many legions inside this fabulous Chaos book, but the World Eaters are one of them, and they can really pack a punch. You know, I think every legion's good. I think every legion can do a lot, but I would say, as they should be, the World Eaters are certainly the close combat kings of the Codex.
Now, Horn, you're like a Khorne authority, is where I would kind of describe you. Give us a rundown of your list.
Okay, so I've been thinking a lot about Khorne and about what to do, but also trying to be realistic in terms of 8th edition, getting in there, using Khorne units, but also striking a balance so you can deal with things like conscript screens and all sorts of stuff like that. So I've come up with a core, and I'll leave it abridged, kind of like Andrew did. I liked that touch. And we can discuss why I like this core for World Eaters Army. So going right on into HQ, if you're going to do World Eaters, you got to take Khorne. You just have to do it. It's a rule. It's in the Codex, in the fine print. And then after you take Khorne, I was going to take a Demon Prince with the relic, the Talisman of Burning Blood. Got to give him 2 Malefic Talents and a Warp Bolter. just because you have some points.
That's not a bad gun either. Can you run down the stats on that real quick?
No, the Warbolter is great. It's Assault 2. I believe it's 18-inch range, Strength 4, AP -1, Damage 2, which is good. And even if you advance, the Talisman of the Burning Blood lets you charge, but you could still shoot this thing because it's an assault weapon. So for 9 points, that's pretty good. Bikes hate it. Sanguinary Guard hate it. Anything that's 2 wounds really hates a cheap gun that's damage 2. So those are your HQs on lockdown. You got some really hard hitting guys, and you have also the ability to buff if you have to, if you need to. And then going on into troops, you can no longer take berserkers as troops, so you have to go to either Chaos Space Marines or cultists. And in this particular instance, I chose cultists. 3 units of 10. I think that will be a common theme with Chaos Space Marine lists going forward. And then you hop over into elites, where, again, if you're playing Khorne, this is probably going to be a formation you see all the time, which is just going to be 3 units of 8 Khorne Berserkers, all with chain axes, and the Icon of Wrath in a Rhino.
I love that you can hide their buffs with the icons in the unit. I mean, we talked about it before, but people can't target them. You get to choose which models you remove when you remove casualties, and you just basically keep that buff for as long as you want it.
It's a good way to do it, and for the Legion-specific units, well, I guess nothing really is now. It's cool because you don't find yourself paying points for, I'll pay 2 points for Khorne, but 4 for Nurgle. It's just, I'm going to take this mark, and I want this benefit, and so I'll take the icon if I want it. I really like the new mark system. So you got your HQs, you got your 3 Berserkers and Rhinos. It's pretty standard. And then we have to talk about my favorite unit in the whole Chaos Space Marine Codex is the Defiler. And you might ask, why is it my favorite? Well, it's probably because I played the heck out of them in 5th edition, and they sat in foam for 7 years, and now they're coming back out because they got a 67-point discount from the index, and I've got 3 of them in this list. 3 Defilers, each with the Defiler Scourge and the Reaper autocannon. It's a commitment. I've got them. They're built, they're painted, they're magnetized.
With models that dusty, I would almost think you'd be playing Thousand Suns.
Oh, that's a good one. Good thing for me, I actually am playing them.
That was cringeworthy. Cringeworthy. I respect that.
I still got it, folks.
It was a good one. So you have this core of 3 Defilers and 3 Berserker Rhinos. So the thing I like about the Defiler is, as Andrew mentioned in the first half of the show with the Soul Grinder, is it's just as tough. It's not, if it's not Nurgle, it's just as tough. It's got good options in terms of shooting, and it's actually really good in combat. In combat, you can throw out 7 attacks that are strength 12, AP -2, or 3 attacks that are strength 12, AP -2, and then 3 that are strength 16, AP -3. So it's no slouch in combat.
That still sounds ridiculous to even to say strength 16, but it actually does matter. Like that 16 matters.
The 16 really does matter. And then the big thing I like about the Defiler, if you do go up against something really shooty that you have to play really cagey against, you have a battle cannon. So you can actually deploy outside of las cannon range and dance around until you have an opportunity or until you can maneuver around terrain to get to a better position. And that really matters when you can say, okay, well, I'll hide my Rhinos over here, and then I'll sit at 50 inches and fire battle cannons. Defilers also benefit from the Demon Forge stratagem, which is awesome. You can spend 1 command point and reroll all hits and wounds. And either whether you're in combat or you're shooting, that is such a gigantic boost to that model.
That's unexpected. It could throw people off because, I mean, if you do close and make close combat with those guys, you're probably in an advantageous position. So capitalizing on that is even better.
Yeah, the Defiler it moves 8 inches, which if you think about it, it's way better in combat than the Mauler Fiend, but it only moves 2 inches slower, and it has a bunch more guns.
Don't talk bad about the Mauler Fiend. Oh,
I like Mauler Fiends, don't get me wrong, but you could pay 25 more points and get all these guns and have more wounds and have more attacks.
So the Mauler Fiend has 10 attacks.
It does have 10 attacks. 6 of those are not quite as strong as the others.
That's true.
But for sure, I really like the Morphine, don't get me wrong. And so that is the kind of core I was talking about with the World Eaters. You've got the ability to shoot if you need to. You have the ability to rush forward. And then Defilers themselves are also very good counter assault if anything has to come at you.
I don't think the Defilers break the theme mold either. I think that they are still a very assault-based unit, even though they do have some kind of cool guns on them.
They do have guns. They do not themselves benefit from the World Eater stratagem, but mine are certainly painted very red. And at the end of the day, it's a big, punchy crab machine that seems to be like a World Eater.
I'll give it to you.
And then you've got about 400 points left. And so you have a way, again, like as Andrew was saying, I like this touch, ways to make it your own. You can add in more troops, more assault, more shooty if you want. You could add in some demons. Hey, you could just summon. If you really wanted to, you could summon in 40 bloodletters, 50 bloodletters, something like that, which is a good option.
You can get some apostles in there?
You could. The Dark Apostles really do work well with Khorne Berserkers because, again, you get that leadership buff, and reroll the hits on them is just crazy. Karn can give it to you as well, but it's a bit more dangerous.
That's almost like a whole other detachment point level. A couple cultists and an apostle or whatever.
I will say I'm a huge fan of bloodletters.
Yes,
I think they perform some admirable functions, and obviously I don't play Chaos affirmatively, but I've played against Chaos a lot in 8th edition, and there's some stuff that I'm just flabbergasted that Chaos players are trying to make work, and then others that I'm flabbergasted that they don't occur more often, and Bloodletters certainly fit into that latter category. Where, man, they're just great because even if you assault them, they get those kind of assault bonuses. They're +1 strength, +1 attack, all the AP, whatever. They're great screening units.
Well, they got a couple different rules, and the first one is, it's not the first one, but the one you're talking about, the Unstoppable Ferocity. If a unit charges or is charged, add +1 to the strength and attack characteristics of all models in this unit until the end of the turn.
That's right, and they are rarely, if ever, going to be locked in combat. And by that I mean if they're screening if you have a Chaos shooty list, which is not outside the realm of possibilities, especially with the onset of Noise Marines, Forge World Decimators with the Soul Burst cannons, which are ungodly powerful. If you're playing with the Chaos shooty list, Bloodletters are a phenomenal screening unit. They're very inexpensive. What are they, Corton? 6 points model? 7 points a model? 7 points a model. Very affordable. They've got that 5-up invul, which is that's better than a guardsman. And more importantly, if you assault them, they get this bonus. And then they fall out of combat, so the rest of their army can shoot you. And then they find themselves back in combat because you have to re-assault them. And so they're not really losing those buffs. They basically are full-time strength 5 and 2 attacks each. And a 7 points a model, really, really strong.
Yeah, if
huge
20
fan
or
of
more, they're hitting on 2s.
Well, and the Hellblades are another thing you've got to think about, right? On a 7-point model, a Hellblade is essentially a power sword. You've got a strength 5 power sword. Power swords for normal Space Marine cost 4 points. So essentially, you have a 3-point model with a 5+ invulnerable save and a 4-point power sword.
Yep. That's a fantastic way to look at it.
Any attack rolls with a wound roll of 6+, or any attacks with a wound roll of 6+ for this weapon, have damage characteristic of 2 instead of 1.
Bingo.
Yep. A 30-man unit will kill a knight when they charge it. They're insane.
And what's really cool is that, we talk about here's what, even if you don't have those big numbers, 20, 30-man squads, even if they're 10s, that's still a unit of models that the average assault unit wants no part of.
Well,
they don't want
20 of them with an instrument is 150 points.
It's a bargain. That's literally better than Sanguinary Guard in every conceivable measure. They're better than Sanguinary Guardsmen. It's unbelievable.
That one unit, that basically makes up half of the total models for any army that I have. So in terms of sheer, body to body count, it boggles my mind sometimes.
The big thing about them is they went to power level 4. So if you are trying to summon the unit you just mentioned, 20 and an instrument, then you only need an 8 on 3 dice. So you're basically you should get that every time. And if you can bank around making a unit like that, that unit will just obliterate stuff.
Let's look at the demonic ritual rule one more time, if you don't mind. Instead of moving in the movement phase, any chaos character can, at the end of the movement phase, attempt to summon a demon unit with this ability by performing a demonic ritual. Can't do so if they arrive via deep strike themselves or whatever. If you do so, first choose one of the 4 chaos gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh. If you owe your allegiance, you have to whatever. You have to pick the god specific to you. Roll 3 dice. This is your summoning roll. You can summon 1 new unit with a demonic ritual ability to the battlefield. You don't have to choose what you're summoning until you make that roll. So if you roll a 4 on 3 dice, it's unlikely. You just say, cool, I'm bringing in 10 bloodletters.
Yeah, it's really flexible. So if you have a bunch of Khorne demons or demons of any variety lying around, it's a super helpful tool.
Oh, I just want to point out, it's not a check that you can fail. The only way that you fail it is that if you roll a number that is so low it doesn't meet any power level. And with the smallest power level for the lesser demons being 4, it's really unlikely that you fail on 3 dice.
The Fury is actually 3.
You can always get.
So you can always get Furies. So if you need to hold an objective, you can always get something on it.
Of which I have 20 in the old medals. So if anybody's interested, hit me up on Facebook or
bring it to the
Twitter.
next tournament. Now you never know.
Okay, yeah, we have to be fighting over that. Yeah.
Looking to sell my Furies if anybody's interested.
I got to have
rare.
some 3 insurance. That's what you need.
Exactly.
Oh, I didn't even think about that because I'm prone to be rolling a bunch of 1s. I need to make sure that I can always have some models to summon in.
Yeah, so bloodletters are certainly an option, whether you're going to fill out your list with World Eaters. But they're just looking for more ways to punch you in the face, and bloodletters certainly fill that role.
I just like that it's for that extra 1 inch on the charge and assault rolls, advance rolls. I mean, that's a big shift. That is a big math advantage.
It's a big deal. You always want the instrument.
And it's 10 points. I mean, I don't think I misread that. I believe it's 10 points. And if you're playing Chaos, set aside some points for summoning. I think you will always be rewarded. And you can't take Demon Princes out of the Chaos Space Marine book, but you can take Demon Princes out of the Demon Index right now.
So let me play the fool for a moment, and on this list ask why cultists in any situation end up being better than power armor. Because one of the things, of course, that we were being sold on with the new Chaos book was the idea that, you can bring your Chaos Space Marine power armor guys again, and it can work.
Well, I think in this particular instance, you already have power armor punchy guys, and so you don't need more power armor punchy guys because you already have them because you're taking berserkers. And if you're trying to go punch people in the face with power armor, the Chaos Space Marine is 13 points, and then the berserker is 16, and the berserker's a little bit better. So
twice as better in that phase.
He's up to 3 times as better.
And is sort of really.
That's a good question, though, and a good point.
So I think Chaos Space Marines have their place. I don't think they have a dramatic place in World Eaters. I mean, they'll certainly do work because they get +1 attack. But the punchy infantry of the World Eaters are the berserkers, especially the berserkers, because you get +1 attack each time you activate, which is potentially 3 times if you burn the stratagem. So you're potentially getting +3 attacks, not +1.
And if anything's alive after the second round, somebody needs to check somebody's save dice. That's all I'm just
that's what's nuts though, because if you have the ability to, with 1 unit, kill everything within 12 inches because you get multiple pile-ins and consolidates. And the berserker with the chain axe. Berserker, just look at the chainsword. The berserker with the chainsword has 2 attacks, 3 in close combat, and he would charge for 4, right? And then he would activate 3 times if you burn the stratagem, which means you'd be getting 12 attacks per model, which is just insane.
That's crazy. And I was having this discussion with a buddy. He's like, "Well, what would you put in this list?" And I think that in a World Eater list, how would you, if I was going to make any tweaks? I think one of your main weaknesses is getting people out of rhinos so you can carve them up.
Yes, so you certainly want to add something in those remaining 400 points to try to help you do that. I think Helldrakes go a long way because you can fly up and flame stuff and then also still assault it. And then when they pile out, if they assault your Helldrake, you get to flame it and then fly out and flame it again. But in terms of actually just trying to open up rhinos at range, I mean, you can take predators, you can take other things. But
the Predator's
general,
good. They get the same stratagem that the Space Marines get with the kill shot, and the Predator autocannon is still it's the 3 damage. It's a good weapon.
I 100% agree with you. I think 3 Predators is awesome. I actually own 3 Predators, but with the World Eaters, I just had to go with the Defilers.
Oh, no, that's a good choice. I guess what I was pointing out is that if you are massing Berserkers and you thought that maybe adding maybe just a bunch more Berserkers might be the answer, or consider the possible weaknesses of the list, and that's getting people out of things so you can carve them up. Because you will. Yes. You will definitely carve them up as long as there are next to choke. You will be able to choke them, but you need them out there in the for the opportunity.
I have played a few games now of Mech Assault World Eaters versus Mech Assault Black Templars, and that game is literally whoever gets out of their rhinos first loses.
Yeah,
because everybody has the power to pick up a whole unit with one charge, and so yeah.
So they all basically have the power of like 3 mortar squads.
Don't even start on
I think you were overestimating the mortar squad.
Oh my goodness, yes. Mortars are cheap though. They're an effective way to put out lots of hits. Or lots of attacks.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to
Someone
make
said mortars. Hold Andrew down. Hold him down.
Hold him down. I was talking.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a good friend of ours and friend of the show, and he was like, yeah, like I love listening to Forge the Narrative when you're on there because it's basically a drinking game. Whenever you say the word Vestroyan, you have to take a shot. Because I always talk about my guardsmen and the mortars and Vestroyans and stuff. So hey, Will,
the opportunity to talk about guards.
Vestroyan. Hey, drink up.
Let's do a finishing move segment. Bear with me, guys, while I talk about this because this is like a step before a finishing move segment I want to talk about. And I want to talk about masking. I know that just sounds really boring, but it's important because I watch a lot of tutorials on stuff, and I will say that it is not as easy as the pros make it look. This segment is brought to you by Frontline Gaming. If they just put out a new battle mat, go check it out at frontlinegaming.org. It's awesome. It's got a chaos symbol on it. It matches in the theme. Some of the terrain I'm building for Warzone is Frontline Gaming terrain. And just check them out. Big believer in it. Put money where my mouth is. And happy to have them as sponsors of the show. And they're constantly releasing new products. But masking can come in many different forms. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today. I use the Tamiya tape because I think it's the best, and it's a product that is specifically designed for masking. And if you check out my Twitter feed, I was recently doing some storage crates, and they didn't for terrain, just for line of sight blocking terrain, and they didn't look as cool as I wanted them to be. I actually painted. These are the kind that have like a cardboard insert in them to be the main bulk of the line of sight blocking stuff, and I actually painted the cardboard and it just looked like cardboard. Like I painted it to look like cardboard. That was not what I wanted to do in my mind. Just didn't work out. So I'm like, I know what I'll do. I will tape off a cool design on this thing, and then I'll spray over. Incredibly simple. Just kind of taped off the perimeter of the outward banding of it. It's got a neat little design. Check it out. Warmaster_TPM is my Twitter. I posted up that picture. But when I'm taping on figures, now I'm taping on a piece of cardboard that I spray painted. So there was no caution, no nothing in my mind when I went to put that tape on. But I have been in situations where I have this precisely taped out things, stripes on rhinos, things on figures. On my Inquisition rhinos is a big thing because I wanted to get the red and white stripes on them. I've put the base coat down, waited what I thought was the appropriate amount of time for it to dry, laid down the stripe, and then when I pulled it up, sure enough, it pulled some paint off. And this is using the Tamiya stuff. So this is the stuff that's using, this specifically designed for this kind of stuff, and I still screwed it up. So I've got a tip for that.
Masking is such so situational. I've probably masked, I don't know, less than a dozen models in the 6 years I've been playing 40k and painting 40k models. But when it happens, you really want it to be perfect. So that is a ringing product endorsement, because as infrequent as it is, I mean, I think I've masked like my Imperial Knights are probably the biggest things. When you're doing those caution stripes or whatever else, like you want it to be perfect, you want it to be right. And so, like I said, that is a ringing endorsement of that product if that's the one you want to use.
It comes in different thicknesses, and there's basically is one that's the exact thickness of a knight shoulder hazard stripe. You know, it's perfect, but the tape itself, I want to say, is not always perfect. So how do you plan for it not being perfect, like the stickiness of it? So I've got some tips to avoid that pulling up the paint, even when you think that it's safe to lay the tape down. And you can also get this works. What I'm going to suggest works with any masking tape. I'm talking about even masking tape you could get from the grocery store. You know, on that school supply aisle nobody goes to, or whatever. I don't know. With the paper products, you can get whatever the masking tape is there and use it. But I try to seal the model always. If for some reason I've forgotten, or I don't have time, or even I didn't put enough sealer on there, I can still run the risk of pulling the bottom coat up or even the sealer and creating that weird ridge effect. You can de-tack the tape before you put it on. You don't really need full strength tape to give you a clean line on a figure or a model or a building or whatever. You can simply kind of just like stick the tape down on your pants leg or the arm of your shirt and pull it off, and that's going to de-tack it enough to where it's still going to give you that crisp line, but you have less of a chance of it damaging your model.
Well, masking is one of those things where I don't do a lot of color schemes that aren't really blocked off. Or not already blocked off on the model. Pretty much the only time I think of masking is if I'm trying to do a hazard stripe of some kind.
Now, I think that on a model or on a Space Marine shoulder pad or something like that, you're probably still going to be better off painting that by hand or using the paint pens instead of going with masking. But anything like rhino size and above, I prefer to use some type of mask. But let me also go one step further with the masking and talk about something that maybe has come up for some of you guys, and this is a power weapon after you've already finished the model. There's all these techniques out there about how to airbrush on a power weapon, how to give some cool effects on power weapons. Tons of tutorials out there. I suggest checking them out. They're all pretty good, and they suggest different masking of the weapon itself and whatever. But I want to talk about it's difficult to mask a model off after you've already got it painted. Something that I've found that works for me is using some plastic wrap, some cellophane, or even that wrap with the handle on it that you get for like moving supply places. You know, you see like pallets get cellophaned off with one of these big wrappers, and even some comes in shipping stuff. You'll see this wrapper. You can wrap that around your model the same way you would do something on a pallet. Paper towels on a pallet or whatever, you can wrap it around a model and it won't harm the paint on the model.
Most of my airbrushing is done at the base coat stage. So for example, when I paint power weapons, I don't airbrush. It's a lot of dry brushing and then stenciling to some extent depending on the weapon, but dry brushing and freehand brushing. But I can totally see the utility. I mean, I think if you, for example, I remember airbrushing a turret on a Sakaran tank that I was painting. And I was like, well, how am I going to get this thing so that I can airbrush this turret but not get any on the body of the tank? And you hit the nail on the head. You just put some cellophane down. I mean, even if you just kind of tear a hole through the cellophane.
Yeah, I'm talking about really poking the power sword right through the cellophane.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
Guesswork, no patching, no nothing, and it will completely cover your model.
Yep, that seems like a really, really good way to do it.
And this is the no-brainer stuff. And this is stuff that, I mean, I'm guilty of it. I know that I have thought that I masked off enough space and then fired up my airbrush, and because I have such a heavy hand with it, I blasted the model with whatever paint I did not intend to get on the head or the shoulder or whatever. Using something like the cellophane, you're not tearing off strips of tape. You're not trying to make sure that you've got enough area covered. You cover the entire model with a fraction of a penny's worth of material. This is not even expensive, and you're safe. Your paint is safe, and you can get experimental and take that next step with your painting.
Now I know.
There you go. This is stuff you can find that I think it's Tamiya, might be Tamiya. I think it's Tamiya tape in most hobby stores. You can find it online. Cellophane, plastic wrap, you can find it at your grocery store.
Now, one thing that people may want to consider, and I'm just remembering this after a conversation I had with one of my very excellent hobby friends, was the use of a putty as masking instead. Now, have you ever tried something like that, Paul?
The blue tack, like the poster tack, the stuff that that you get. Also, you can also get that from the grocery store. That works great, but I find that works a little bit better for organic patterns, like camouflage.
That's very interesting.
But it works.
I mean, I kind of attribute everything that this guy does to just him being really, really good at this, just naturally. So I look at something he does and I'm like, wow, that looks really good, but could I do that?
Dude, that's what I'm telling you. I guess the reason that I suggested the techniques that I did a second ago was because it takes the guesswork out. Because I think that if you are good, there's liquid mask out there that some people use for their cockpits or painting over things for gyms and stuff. I'm not that good. I'm not gonna get a real crisp line with the liquid mask, and I know I'm not gonna get a real crisp. I'm not. I don't mean you're not. I mean I'm not gonna get a crisp line with the putty, but I'm sure some people can.
It's one more tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best takeaways. Just finding something that you can do that works for you. And the things that I just described in the first part are things that work for me, having zero natural talent with the stuff.
Amen to that.
Well, guys, this has been a good show. I appreciate you talking about Grey Knights and the Chaos Space Marines. And there's a lot of good stuff planned coming up. Remember, keep your eyes peeled for Warzone tickets. Cannot wait to get people down here. It's going to be awesome. You guys have a good rest of your night.
Good night, homies.
Good night, everybody.
You too.